Hey, good morning, and welcome to, I guess, the week 7, the next to the last week. Um, we're progressing in developmental psychology, talking about adult issues now, or at least maybe young adult issues last week. Um, it's kind of interesting. I mean, I think of marriage, different institutions like marriage and cohabitation, which was what the discussion was about. Those kinds of institutions that have to do with what we'll call horizontal relationships, as opposed to relationships with your parents, relationships with your children, but the horizontal ones are the ones with your friends, peers, partners, lovers, whatever you want to call it. That is really one of the most, probably the most essential relationships that we have in adulthood, is those kinds of relationships, because it's in those relationships that we are best developed in who we are. Um, and so, I find this last discussion that we had, well, this discussion, excuse me, that we had last week, be really phenomenal in helping us to understand a couple of different things. First of all, what is this institution that we call marriage? What is this institution we call cohabitation? I purposefully chose the two different videos for a lot of reasons. One of them is to look at these two institutions because, on the one hand, we might kind of think that cohabitation is like the 21st century version of marriage. I think many of you sort of pointed that out. Um, and I think probably, well, I'll mention Kyra and Buba, I think, pointed that out. It's getting interesting. Kyra had probably a very popular opinion, talking about marriage. Sort of marriage is not really pertinent in our 21st century society. Well, that's one way I could interpret that. Boba had another kind of insight on the same kind of thing about marriage being not very pertinent. But Booba, you pointed out very well that the way generations change, the way we change from the 20th century, maybe to the 21st century, one of the changes that we'll see is that the younger generation doesn't seem to have that same sense of long-term commitment. Um, they go into relationships probably planning how to get out of them just as much as they go into relationships planning how to stay in them, where maybe, people 20 or 30 years ago would go into a relationship not so much counting how to get out, but thinking about, well, I'm really going to look at ways of staying in and making it work. Um, and so maybe that's different. Lakia pointed out something, I think she was pointing out something very interesting about this as far as the age. Not so much the cohort effect of different generations, but age in and of itself. Maybe younger people, particularly those before 25, don't have the same brain development, cognitive development to see things through, to be able to count costs, to be able to see our own needs and involvement in things. And this is why relationships, either marital or cohabitational relationships that start before age 25 don't seem to last. Maybe we're not really ready before the age of 25 to be able to commit to something. Um, another another important point, Caitlin, you pointed out how the present day institution of cohabitation seems to be a pretty serious step in relationships and learning how to commit. Because maybe people who are serious about cohabitation, they look at it as an opportunity to build commitment, to build long-term relationships. Um, I think this is the thing, is that we really need to question and be honest with ourselves. Why are you doing it? If it's just really about sex, say it. We're not going to help ourselves by being dishonest with ourselves. If it is something that we say, well, I really am taking this relationship very seriously and I'm going to work toward a longer term relationship, then that's a different thing. One more point I was trying to make with my questions. I wish I didn't have to ask those questions until after you saw the video. So you watch the video, but you already have the questions in front of you. As a couple of you pointed out, that kind of biases your response to know what I'm asking. But bias, I make this point that I'm not really sure any of us could ever really be free of bias. Most all of us look at somebody and make some prejudgments, and maybe that's not so much somebody's value, but we do make judgments. When you hear someone mention the Bible or religion or the Quran or something, then you have a bias, you have a response to that. I found that the contrast between seeing these younger, fairly attractive people and seeing an older man whose hair was thin and it was wearing a really wide stripe, I think it was a striped necktie, um, that contrast between the vision um, might be off-putting to some people. To you, if you're 18 or 19 or 20 years old and you see an older guy like that, maybe your first response is, this person doesn't really have anything to tell me, and especially if what he's saying is a comment on the lifestyle that I've chosen to live. I'm not, please don't get me wrong, I'm not judging anybody or saying that anybody's done anything right or wrong in this situation. All I want to do is to point out to you that as adults, we are constantly struggling with this and looking back and saying, why did I think that? Do I have this inherent bias um, against something, or am I biased? You can be biased towards something. If you are a person who has made certain life choices, then you're going to be biased toward those choices. In other words, it's going to make you more comfortable or be around people or hear people talk positively about the things that you've chosen. And if you're hearing someone say something negative about life choices that you've made, then that then would give you an inherent bias against that. So anyway, I'm just trying to open your minds to things. I hope you're having a great week, and I will see you next week when we'll be talking about our discussion from week 7. And take care of yourselves.